Penticton City Council voted last week to close down the Victory Church Emergency Homeless Shelter, but BC Housing has now sent a letter asking them to reconsider, or the province will use its paramountcy powers to override council and keep the shelter open anyway. Castanet spoke with BC's Minister of Housing about the letter and more on Wednesday.
Can you tell me what the content of that letter is and why it was sent?
Sure. This is exactly the option that was left to the provincial government when the city voted down the extension to the temporary use permit for the shelter that would make 42 people street homeless. The letter sets out that the province does not have to follow the city's zoning rules for a provincial operation, which we take the position the shelter is. And it invites the city to reconsider their decision or to write back to us regardless by next Monday.
And how unusual is it paramountcy is the term that comes up. How unusual is it for the province to use that?
The province has used this power before. It's very rare to use it over the objections of a municipality. Typically, it's used with the support of a municipality. It facilitates a rapid provincial response to a crisis in a community. But it has been used over the objections of municipalities before, and Maple Ridge is an example of that. It's not a preferred approach by anybody, and I think both municipalities and the province, and certainly I believe that we come up with better solutions together when we're working together and identifying sites and how buildings will look and how they'll operate. But in the absence of that cooperation, we do have to go ahead. We can't have encampments in cities like Penticton.
And you've set a deadline of March 15th.
So we're expecting to hear back from Penticton by Monday, and but there's no consequence if they decide not to write back. The shelter just keeps operating, and we will continue with our planning around additional supportive housing in Penticton so that we can close that shelter.
It's been kind of a war of words between you and Penticton City Council in recent days and the past week. John Vasilaki, Mayor of Penticton, in his most recent statement, at least to us at Castanet, called you a bully and called the province accused the province of bullying the city. What's your response to that?
My phone remains on. I'm not interested in having a name calling contest with any local officials. It's about the 42 people who live in the shelter and whether or not the province will allow them to be emptied out into a local park. And the short answer is we will not. And that's the end of the story. And so I believe that we would have a much better outcome for Penticton if City Council recognized that reality and we all work together to address how to and where to house these homeless folks. But unfortunately, that is not currently the situation, although certainly my phone remains on if council wants to talk.
And you've spoken as well in the past about your concerns about Penticton becoming a situation like Victoria, like Vancouver, where we are having encampments. Can you expand a little bit on that? Why is that a concern?
Sure. Cities shouldn't be tricked into thinking that encampments are somehow just big city issues. Many small municipalities across the province are grappling with encampments, both large and small. And there is a BC Court of Appeal decision that governs the entire province that says that where there's nowhere else to go, no emergency shelter, no supportive housing, that people can camp in parks and they can camp on public land. And so it can happen very quickly. And especially when you're getting into the neighborhood of 160 people who are homeless, as Penticton is, then you're talking about a fairly sizable encampment that is impossible to remove. You can't get an injunction. The police will not remove it. You can't direct the police to remove it. And the only way to deal with it is to open sufficient housing to get people inside. And so that's what we're doing in a number of communities, not just Vancouver and Victoria. We're also working in smaller communities. We typically do it in partnership with the city. But in Penticton, where a city is unwilling to acknowledge the scope of the problem that they face and take steps that move the city closer to having encampments, it's really imperative for the province to step in and say that we need to not have more encampments. It's incredibly expensive to deal with, and we have to move very quickly. We don't get the time to assess tenants before they're moved into buildings and make sure they're a good fit, that they have the supports that they need before they go in. We're just working as quickly as we can to get people inside. And we just don't want to be in that situation in Penticton And we won't be in that situation in Penticton. My preference, though, would be to work with the council on how we move forward.
So to be clear, at this point, if you don't hear anything back from council, if they don't reverse their decision at this coming week's meeting, it's the intention of the province to keep operating this emergency shelter through to the end of March 2022.
That's right. The letter sets out very clearly that it's our intent to continue operating the shelter to keep people inside and support them as best we can in an emergency shelter, which is not the preferred location. And if we don't hear back from council, we'll just continue with our plans in relation to additional supportive housing in Penticton so we can close the shelter and we can move people inside ultimately.
And is additional supportive housing, that includes the Skaha Lake Road proposed development that you've purchased, BC Housing purchased the land already. So what's the latest with that? That's
right. The Skaha Lake Road project was the source of the initial conversations with Penticton City Council. They had questions about how the existing supportive housing in the city was working, and they wanted us to use a third party to collect metrics about impacts on surrounding neighborhood as well as impacts inside the building. We were agreeable to do that to inform the decision around Skaha and what supports should be there and the existing housing as well. Obviously that was all fairly significantly derailed about a week and a half ago.
And so what's in terms of that moving forward, that project is obviously separate from the Victory Church emergency shelter. Is there anything new to report on that Skaha Lake Road development?
Well, in my mind, the Skaha Lake Road development and supportive housing in Penticton is directly related to the shelter because the shelter is a temporary emergency shelter. The whole plan was to close down the shelter and move people inside. And so these projects are very connected in my mind and certainly in BC Housing's approach.
And you're awaiting City Council's decision on that specific area?
Yeah, I look forward to hearing back from City Council what their plan is. You know, we can't figure it out on the phone, that's fine. Maybe we can figure out in writing what the city's plan is about this crisis that has been created in Penticton. It's an unnecessary crisis to my mind, and I imagine the city must have a plan. I just don't know what it is. So it's possible we'll hear about that by Monday, and it might be an agreeable plan that we can all move forward on. But then again, it might not. Is there anything you'd like to say to City Council members or the mayor at this point? Just that the door remains open. I regret the tone of the discussion, but I will say that any time that Penticton Council wants to have a serious discussion about supportive housing and moving forward to close the shelter and get people permanently housed, my office door remains open.